Howdy all, and welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast, the show where we explore the stories of various saints throughout history and learn about what they did and how we came to recognize them as saints today. Today, we're going to explore the life of Saint Maximilian Kolbe, a faithful traveler who wound up in the worst place imaginable. Alright, so let's start off with his birth. Seems like a pretty good place to start, right? Saint Maximilian was actually born with the name Raymond Kolbe on January 8th, 1894. He didn't get the name Maximilian until he was 16, actually. He was born in Zduńska Wola in Poland, which was actually part of the Russian Empire at the time, and he was the second of 4 children, but 2 of his 3 brothers died from tuberculosis when he was young. His father was a weaver, and I know it may seem kind of unnecessary to include that, but it's not very often that we get to know a little bit about a saint's parents if their parents weren't part of royalty or part of some sort of influential group. But anyway, his parents were Julius Kolbe, the weaver, and Maria Dabrowska. And really, for the first few years of his life, there was not much out of the ordinary. However, in 1903, when he was just 9 years old, Maximilian had a vision or a visit from the Virgin Mary. And these are his words describing the encounter. That night, I asked the Mother of God what was to become of me. Then she came to me, holding 2 crowns, one white, the other red. She asked me if I was willing to accept either of these crowns. The white one meant that I should persevere in purity, and the red, that I should become a martyr. I said that I would accept them both. And what really struck me about this is that he was just 9 years old at the time. Like, that's a pretty big decision for a 9-year-old to make. I don't think I would do the same thing if I was 9. I would probably be like freaked out about being told I was going to be a martyr, or choosing that I was going to be a martyr. But just a few short years later, in 1907, Raymond Maximilian and his older brother Francis joined the Conventual of Franciscans, and they enrolled in the minor seminary in Lowell that year. Then, in 1910, they entered the novitiate, and there, then Raymond chose the name Maximilian. He professed his first vows a year later, and then his final vows in 1914. He also adopted the additional name Maria for his vision from the Virgin Mary. During his studies, Maximilian went to Rome in 1912, and he attended the Pontifical Gregorian University. He even earned a doctorate in philosophy from there in 1915. He was just 21 years old. That's pretty impressive. There's not many 21-year-olds earning doctorates in anything. Then he went on to earn another doctorate, a doctorate in theology, from the Pontifical University of St. Bonaventure around 1920. Of course, if you're a fan of history, you know that this is all happening at the same time as World War I, aka the war to end all wars. Maximilian's father, Julius, joined Józef Pilsudski's Polish legions and fought against the Russians to make Poland an independent nation. Unfortunately, Julius was captured, and he was deemed a traitor by the Russians, so he was hanged. At the same time, there was a growing force opposing the church, specifically opposing Popes Pius X and Benedict XV, and this movement was led by the Freemasons. In response, Maximilian organized the Militia Immaculatae, or the Army of the Immaculate One, and his goal with this group was to bring sinners and enemies of the Catholic Church, primarily the Freemasons because they were spearheading the movement, to see the light of their faith through the intercession of the Virgin Mary. Maximilian actually wanted all members of the Franciscan order consecrated into this group that he made, and believe it or not, the idea was fairly well received by other members. But it needed the approval through the hierarchy of the church, and there its momentum slowed. After St. Kolbe passed away, nobody really pursued this further, and so it kind of was just left to stay behind as history. It's an interesting piece of history, but I think it's just going to stay there. All right, got a little bit ahead of myself there, so let me back it up a little bit. Back to 1918. And in 1918, Maximilian was ordained as a priest, and in July of 1919, he returned to Poland. At this time, Poland had just gained its independence, which was a very welcome fact. Maximilian was very active in promoting the Virgin Mary as well in his new home in Poland, and he strongly opposed leftist movements, especially anything to do with communism. Now, I'm not trying to start some sort of political discussion. Please refrain from any sort of comments or discussion about that. I'm just sharing St. Kolbe's story. During this time, Maximilian taught at the Krakow Seminary, but he came down with tuberculosis and he had to take a fairly long break from his work. Tuberculosis was fairly often fatal in this time. He'd already lost 2 brothers to it. But eventually, Maximilian did recover, though he did have persistent health issues for the rest of his life because of this. But he carried on with his work. And in 1922, he founded a monthly periodical called Reisers Nipocolane, which was Night of the Immaculata. And from 1922 to 1926, he operated a publishing press in Grando specializing in religious publications. As this grew, he founded a new conventual Franciscan monastery at Nipocolano near Warsaw, and it became a fairly large religious printing group, and a junior seminary was even opened there a couple of years later because of its growth. After Maximilian's successful printing work, he decided that it was time to go on a few missions. From 1930 to 1936, he went on a few missions to East Asia. He started in Shanghai, China, but didn't really have a whole lot of success there. Rather than give up, though, he went on to Japan. And he did find success in Japan. He opened up the Muganzai no Sono in 1931, which was just outside of Nagasaki. And this was a Franciscan monastery that he opened up, just to get the details out. And interestingly, the monastery survived the bombings of Nagasaki in World War II, which is kind of a miracle in itself. During his time in Japan, he found many converts and many supporters for his periodical. But in 1932, he set out on a different mission. He left Japan and went to Malabar, India, and tried to found another monastery, but he didn't have as much success there as he did in Japan. So, in 1933, he returned to Poland for a short while, but he quickly went back east to Japan. In 1936, he was asked to return to Poland, and that was so that he could be present for a ceremony that was going to appoint him guardian of Nipocolano. Of course, this meant that he had some big duties to carry out in Poland, so he remained there and never made it back to Japan. He started his own radio station in 1938 at Radio Nipocolano, but it was relatively short-lived. World War II was just about to break out, and Maximilian was there to witness its beginnings. He decided to help organize a makeshift hospital for those injured in the war at his monastery, but on September 19th, 1939, he was captured and arrested by the Germans. But that wasn't the end. Maximilian was actually released December 8th that same year. He would then go on to reject the Germans' request to sign the Deutsche Volkslist, which was a document that would grant him German citizenship as long as he recognized his German heritage, which he did have through his parents, but he would not support the Nazi Party. After he was released, he continued working in his monastery and helped anyone and everyone that he could. He didn't run away after he was released. He stayed to make a difference. I think most people wouldn't have the courage to do that. Like, you're arrested by the Nazis. Let go. And you go back and continue to do the very thing that you were arrested for in the first place. That takes some serious courage. And interestingly, Maximilian also continued printing his periodical. Though it was heavily moderated by the Nazi Party, they allowed it to keep going. Now, I was pretty surprised to learn that his work went on for a couple of years, actually. But on February 17th, 1941, Maximilian's monastery was shut down by the Nazis, and 5 priests, including Maximilian Kolbe, were arrested. They were taken to Pauiak prison by the Gestapo for a few months, and then on May 28th, they were transferred to one of the worst places in the world, Auschwitz. Maximilian Kolbe never stopped preaching, though, and this drew a lot of bad attention. He was regularly beaten by the guards, but others in the camp would smuggle him into a prison hospital and help treat his wounds to get him better. Nothing could calm his passion to work for the Lord and help anyone that he could. In July of 1941, a prisoner escaped, and as punishment, 10 men were selected to be starved to death. Maximilian Kolbe was not one of these selected men, but when Franciscus Awajiscus, I think that's how you pronounce it. I listened to a pronunciation of the name, but it's really confusing. Anyway, when Franciscus cried out, "My wife, my children," Maximilian Kolbe knew what he had to do. He stepped up and took Franciscus' place and agreed to be starved to death. An eyewitness account says that Kolbe led the others in prayer during their sentence, and every time the guards checked on them in their cell, the men would just calmly look at them. There was no anger, no suffering in their eyes. And after 2 weeks, 4 of the 10 were still alive, including Maximilian Kolbe. Now, the Nazis weren't too keen on their cell being occupied for so long when they were expecting everybody to be dead within like a few days, probably. So they decided to give all of the remaining men lethal injections of carbolic acid. Maximilian raised his arm when they came to give him the injection, embracing his sentence. He died August 14th, 1941, and was cremated the very next day, which just so happened to be the feast day of the Assumption of Mary. Maximilian Kolbe's beatification process began June 3rd, 1952, and on January 30th, 1969, he was beatified by Pope Paul VI. He was canonized by Pope John Paul II on October 10th, 1982. The Pope declared that he was a confessor and a martyr of charity, and even has miracles attributed to him, something that isn't really necessary for a martyr, but there was some controversy around his martyrdom, which the Pope felt like he had to include the miracles to appease some of these people opposing it. What the people opposing the canonization were saying is that because Kolbe wasn't killed out of hatred specifically for the Christian faith, but rather his devotion to help God's children survived is what killed him, they kind of felt that it didn't really fit the rules for a martyred saint. And I think that's a bit ridiculous for people to say that he doesn't deserve it because of that technicality. Like, I get it, it wasn't the same as what the rule said, like verbatim, but he did it because of his faith. If it weren't for his devotion, he probably would have fled Poland long before this. Like, after the first time he was arrested, he probably would have been like, nope, I'm out of here. But because he was devoted, he stayed. And because he was devoted, he chose to get himself killed to help somebody else. And I feel like that's a martyr for your faith. In any case, the two miracles that were attributed to Maximilian Kolbe's intercession are both for healing. And they are that in July of 1948, Angela Testoni prayed for Maximilian Kolbe's help to cure her intestinal tuberculosis, and her prayers were answered. Then, in August of 1950, Francis Rainier prayed to Kolbe to cure his calcification in his arteries, and he was cured. And with these two miracles, Pope John Paul II was confident that the sticklers that wanted to check some boxes before they could canonize Maximilian Kolbe, they had all that they needed. And so he went ahead and canonized him. And something that I think is really awesome is that Franciscus Augustius survived the Holocaust. And he was present at both Maximilian's beatification and canonization ceremonies. The man that Kolbe sacrificed himself to save actually survived, all thanks to Kolbe. He would have never made it out of there. He was sentenced to die, but Kolbe literally took his place and died for him. And remembering the situation in the camp, Franciscus said, "I could only thank him with my eyes. I was stunned and could hardly grasp what was going on. The immensity of it. I, the condemned, am to live, and someone else willingly and voluntarily offers his life for me, a stranger. Is this some dream?" Like, I couldn't imagine being in Franciscus' shoes when Kolbe did that. Like, you're in the worst place in the world, and this guy just goes up and is like, "Don't worry, I will take your place." And he did, and it actually ended up all working out in the end for Franciscus. At least he survived. Though he suffered, he was able to go out after the war and live his life, all thanks to Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe's feast day is August 14th, and he's the patron saint of prisoners, which kind of makes sense given his death. The patron saint of families, which also makes sense, and for drug addicts, which I thought was an interesting one. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. So, what are your thoughts on Saint Maximilian Kolbe? How about his dedication to his faith in the face of certain death? It's a pretty intense set of circumstances that Kolbe was living in. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts about Saint Kolbe. Thank you for listening. If you would like to support the channel, you can subscribe, download the episode, like, comment, share it with your friends, or you can send me a suggestion on a saint that I can check out by emailing me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. You can find the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, and more. Just search for the Sanctified Podcast and should have a few episodes uploaded on whatever service you're using. Take care and have a wonderful day.